Welcome back. Mariella Frostrup here on Times Radio, coming to you live from the Founders Forum at the Soho Farmhouse in Oxfordshire. And for my 2 o'clock big guest, I've hot-footed it over into the mill room where a live audience is ready and waiting to hear from a politician who's aiming to become the first Chancellor of the first female, dare I say, Chancellor of the Exchequer. Rishi Sunak has put science and technology at the heart of its pre-election growth, the government's pre-election growth strategy. But what could a prospective Labour government offer our audience here today, where some pretty heavy wooing can be expected? I wondered, first of all, I mentioned that you, Rachel Reeves, are aiming to become the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer, whether you think your chances have been improved by the parliamentary committee findings announced this morning, which Boris Johnson has, of course, robustly defended himself against.
Well, first of all, can I say how pleased I am to be here with you today and to be at the Founders Forum, where it's a huge opportunity to meet some really exciting entrepreneurs and innovators. And as I start to continue to set out some of the ideas that Labour would want to take into government, it's great to meet with businesses at the forefront of some of the industries of the future. It's also great to be out of Westminster, where the ongoing saga of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party devouring themselves in this omni-crisis. And I think what gets forgotten in a lot of this is the people who made huge sacrifices during the pandemic. And I remember meeting with a woman about the same age as me who lost her father early on in the pandemic, and he was a bus driver and he drove from the town centre in Ealing to the hospital, and he did that every day. And that was before they put up the panels to keep bus drivers safe, and he died in the hospital that he drove to every day. And when I see things like this report coming out today and Boris Johnson's reaction to it, I think of people like Leslie, the woman I met, and the impact that the pandemic had on her, whilst at the same time Boris Johnson and his cronies were partying in Downing Street. And he still can't say sorry for it. And for all the damage and hurt that he's caused to people, it's all about him in his mind. And it's not about him, it's about the people who made big sacrifices during the pandemic. And he should apologise and put an end to all of this.
And what about in terms of the political landscape and what it does to that? I mean, you know, at the moment it seems very much that the Conservative Party are fighting amongst themselves, but it doesn't speak very well to voters about the political classes in general when a report from the parliamentary committee comes out and is treated like it's just another bit of political ideology rather than an actual report from a credible group of MPs. Do you not worry at all about just the credibility of politicians in voters' eyes?
Oh, of course I worry about those things. I became an MP just after the expenses scandal, then the most recent scandals of Partygate, and also the responsibility of politicians for the cost of living crisis. You know, it was last September when we had the Conservative mini-budget that pushed interest rates up, put financial markets in turmoil, and caused huge damage as well to pension fund investment. And so, you know, all of these things, of course, reflect badly on politicians. But we've had 13 years now of Conservative government. And I think the question people will be asking themselves at the next election is pretty straightforward. After those 13 years, are me and my family better off? Are our schools, our hospital, the transport infrastructure, are they working better than when the Conservatives came to office 13 years ago? Frankly, is there anything in Britain today that works better than when the Conservatives came to power? And I think the answer to those questions are no. It is time for change in Britain. And my job as Shadow Chancellor, working with Keir Starmer and the team, is to set out the alternative. Our alternative to ensure that the economy grows, to tackle the cost of living crisis, and to reform our public services that are on their knees today.
Groundhog Day is opening at the Old Vic, at the Tim Minchin version brought back. And aren't voters also going to be going, this is like Groundhog Day again? Because obviously when the last Labour government left, there was a note left saying there's nothing to spend here, all the money's gone. And that's the situation that you're now going to find yourselves in if you do end up in government. And already an awful lot of the economic promises that have been made by the Labour Party in the manifesto and moving forwards have had to be changed altered and indeed got rid of altogether as a result of the current economic crisis. So is there a reason why people should think that you're any more credible than the people who will be your predecessors if you get voted in?
Well, let me tackle that note from Liam Byrne directly. It was a foolish note, but it was a light-hearted one. Well, the Tories have tested that to destruction because national debt is now 3 times higher than when Labour lost office. So there was money left, and the Conservatives have spent an awful
But we've had
lot
a
of
pandemic in the meantime.
Yes, and
we've had a Ukraine war. We've had a global financial crisis.
Well, Labour faced the global financial crisis and borrowed, as countries did around the world, to stop unemployment from soaring and people's homes from being repossessed. And similarly, this government has borrowed. But the difference between this government and the last Labour governments is what's happened in the wider economy. Because when Labour was last in office, the economy grew on average by just over 2% a year. Under the Conservatives, the economy has grown on average by just under 1.5% a year. And that difference means that when Labour was in government, living standards improved. And when the Conservatives have been in government, living standards have gone backwards. There's a piece today, I think it's on the second page of the Times newspaper, that looks at what's happened to wages during the 13 years that the Conservatives have been in office. And this has never happened before, but wages are no higher today than when the Conservatives came to office. And of course, prices are an awful lot higher, and mortgages and rents have gone through the roof because the Conservatives played fast and loose with the public finances last year with that mini budget, and are now just managing decline as if that's somehow okay. I mean, it might be better than the chaos we had, but I'm so much more ambitious for Britain than that. And I come to something like this, the Founders Forum, and meeting innovators and entrepreneurs with ideas to power our economy and take us forward. And I think we just need to have a government that wants to work with business, work with ordinary working people to make the most of these opportunities and ensure that Britain can again be leading in the jobs and industries of the future.
So let's talk about that bigger picture. You know, you're here today at a forum for tech entrepreneurs who are already doing pretty spectacularly well, but obviously what you'll want to do is encourage more of them to be setting up here in the UK and to be taking advantage of, you know, welcoming business practices in the UK. Those are words not normally associated with the Labour Party, welcoming business practices. How different is the Labour Party that you're, you know, representing in terms of a potential future government, and what would you do for tech entrepreneurs?
Well, under Keir's leadership and with me as Shadow Chancellor and as I hope as the next Chancellor of the Exchequer, Labour is a pro-worker and a pro-business party, proudly pro-business, because we know that it is businesses that create the jobs and the wealth and the prosperity that we need to take our country forward and power our country forward. And there is, as I say, so many opportunities in life sciences, in our cultural industries, in tech, and in some of the green industries of the future. But what I often hear from entrepreneurs, and I've had some of those conversations here already today, is that when businesses are looking to scale up, they often have to go to the US to raise finance. And then when they look perhaps to list in a few years' time, often companies now are looking to the US to list rather than here. And then what happens is the jobs gravitate, the profits gravitate overseas. And I want to keep more of those great British businesses here in the UK. But if you look at listings on the London Stock Exchange compared to the New York Stock Exchange, listings are moving overseas because of that deep pool of finance.
They're also moving to France. I mean, what do you do then to keep businesses here and say, don't go to Paris, don't go to New York?
No, absolutely. And other countries are eating our lunch, and I want to keep those businesses and those jobs here in Britain. There's a number of things that we can do. And I asked Lord Jim O'Neill to do a review for the Labour Party last year on how to make Britain the best place to start and grow a business. And one of the people on that review, Alex Depledge from the startup business Resi that she sold a couple of years ago, she sold her first startup. She's here this week and chatting to her about the challenge of raising finance here in Britain. But we've got a huge pool of pensions money in DB and DC schemes that are often getting quite poor returns for pension savers. In fact, you're more likely to be invested in a startup or in UK infrastructure if you are a Canadian pensioner or a retired professor in the US, in Australia, because they are investing heavily in infrastructure and startups, getting a better return for their savers, but also supporting innovation. And so I'm looking with some of the pensions industry and some of the insurance industry of how we can get more of that money into those startups and those scale-up businesses, so that we've got a pool of capital that's working for savers and also working better for the UK economy.
The government have appointed Anne Bowden, who's started Starling Bank, a rather brilliant woman, started the bank in her mid-50s and raised funding going to, a lot of offices of the sort of entrepreneurs you'll find here today who looked at her and thought she might be their mother and she might have got lost. And that's her words about the experience, not mine. But the fact of the matter is that 2% of seed, only 2% of seed money raised for businesses, it goes to businesses with female entrepreneurs at the helm. What would you do about that? Because that is a clear and very, very unequal disparity.
It's a massive issue. And if women started up businesses and scaled up businesses at the same rate as men, there would be billions of pounds more in the economy. And I've spoken quite a lot to Alison Rose, the Chief Executive of NatWest, about this, who did the Rose Review for government on female entrepreneurship. And I think there are things that can practically be done. I think more mentors, working with investors, because often people look at the founders and what they can do. Actually, working directly with investors to change their mindsets can also make a big difference. Working more with universities to help them work with their students, their PhD students especially, to turn those great ideas into innovative businesses, and to help particularly female founders. But I met a great young woman this morning. She's been running her business based in Cambridge for 5 or 6 years now, and it's creating meat from cells, and they're doing pork belly and bacon, and they've raised money. They've just had their Series A fundraising. Most of the money, sadly, from the US rather than the UK. That's a great British startup, already employing more than 50 people. That could be one of the unicorns, fast-growing businesses that I would want to see listed in the UK and creating those jobs here in Britain. And her co-founder are both women. But, she said it's been a hell of a journey these last few years, trying to be taken seriously by the investors who themselves are mainly male.
And how about the issue of childcare, which I know you've talked about in the past, and continues to be a huge problem for the working female primarily workforce in the UK, and despite endless promises about change, nothing's happening. Surely, economically, that doesn't make any sense, and the cost of childcare in the UK being the highest in Europe, one of the highest in the world, is just insane.
Well, I'm a mum of 2 primary school-age children, so I know about these challenges only too well, especially doing a job that does have very variable hours, when sometimes you don't know until the last minute what time you're going to be home in the evening, and weekend working, etc. So I recognise the challenges that working mums, and it is still, sadly, predominantly women who are the ones who do most of the juggling when it comes to these issues.
So what are you going to do to help them?
Well, Bridget Phillipson is our Shadow Education spokesperson, and she is taking forward and developing our plans that will set out in the manifesto. But we do want to have both affordable and flexible childcare, particularly for people with primary school age children. One of the things that we have already said is that we would have free breakfast clubs at all primary schools. That makes quite a big difference for women, because it means they can take a job that's a bit further from home and start a bit earlier during the day. We've said how we would fund that. It would be using some of the money that we would raise from getting rid of the non-dom tax status. So that's one practical thing that we have already explained how we would pay for, and we'll be setting out more detail of that in the run-up to the election. But
how much money will the getting rid of the non-dom tax status
so
raise?
our analysis...
You're going to find a few people here who might be quite interested in what
So
that sacrifice is going to...
Our analysis uses money from His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and that shows that you can raise just over £3 billion. I think it's £3.2 billion. And we would use that to do two things. First of all, to have one of the biggest ever expansions of the NHS workforce, doubling the number of medical school training places, more nurses, midwives, district health visitors.
£3 billion, is that enough to do that?
That would cost £1.6 billion a year to do that, because obviously this money is every year, so £3.2 billion a year, over £15 billion during the course of a Parliament. And then we would use the other part of that money to have those breakfast clubs at all primary schools.
Yeah, it's only every year that you'd get the non-dom money if they decided to stay in the UK, isn't it? I mean, I presume if they decide to, go elsewhere where they're more welcome financially, then that money wouldn't be coming in. So it's not really going to solve the problems for the NHS, is it?
If you look at the US, they don't have anything like a non-dom rule. If you live in the US, you pay your taxes there on your global income. And I don't think many people would suggest that New York was not a welcoming place for businesses and entrepreneurs. We're one of the very few countries that has a rule like this. And it is a loophole. It basically says that if your dad was born abroad, you can claim non-dom tax status. That is a very odd tax loophole. It's been around for 200 years.
Quite sexist as well.
Quite sexist as well, but I'm not planning on extending it to if your mum was born abroad, but just getting rid of it altogether and using that money for what I think are the real priorities. Having an NHS that is properly functioning and better childcare for working parents and also to give kids a great start in life.
I'm very interested in this notion that you've been talking about, which is, a sort of anti-globalisation stance, if you will, and a focus more on national interest when it comes to business and so on. Now, I know it's related to sort of the ideas of greater security and so on, but tell me a little bit more about what you've dubbed securonomics.
Yes, I definitely wouldn't say it was anti-globalisation, but let me describe what it's about. Securonomics is about two things, essentially. First of all, about trying to have more secure family finances for working families, and second, a more secure and resilient national economy. What do those two things mean? Well, first of all, for many people, that link between hard work and fair contribution has broken down. I remember it was about this time last year meeting a family in Worthing on the south coast, and between the mum and dad, they do 5 jobs between them, and they had a toddler. And balancing work and family life meant that between all of their jobs, they only had half a day a week together as a family. And they were in private rented accommodation. They wouldn't put anything aside.
We know that people are really suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, there is an economic crisis, and there are more people attending food banks.
Yes,
I mean, we know that all those things are difficult. But how are you going to change it for them?
So what the mum said to me was, you just wonder whether you're doing something wrong. And they're not doing anything wrong, they're doing everything right. But the economic model that we've got today is not working for them.
That's what I want to know.
So
So how are you going to
secure
what are you going to do
finances? I want to do more to buy, make and build more in Britain with a more secure national economy. We are over-reliant on countries that don't always share our values for some of the basics, the essentials. We are over-reliant.
That does sound like quite nationalist rather than globalist.
It's about doing
buy,
more...
make and buy in Britain. I mean, that sounds like the 1980s.
Well, look, the alternative is being reliant on China for rare earths to produce electric vehicles, or being reliant on Russia for our energy. And so I'll make no apologies for wanting to build a more secure,
so is it the rest of the world versus
economy.
China and Russia? Is that what you're identifying?
It's about building more secure supply chains, doing more at home and working more closely with allies. So the old model of globalisation that said the fastest, the cheapest, it doesn't matter where things are produced or who owns them, I think that model is over. And instead, a new multilateralism, working more with countries that share our values. And other countries are doing this. It's what the US are doing. And I was there 2 or 3 weeks ago. Their Inflation Reduction Act, their CHIPS Act, their Infrastructure Act is all about ensuring that America has and is doing what it needs to secure its economic interests. In Australia, under Albanese, their Powering Australia model is about investing in some of the green industries of the future, the same as what Scholz is doing in Germany. Other countries are in this race for the jobs and industries of the future. And our Chancellor and our Energy Secretary say that this approach is dangerous, referring to what the US are doing in terms of building their resilience and their green industry programme. Well, what is dangerous is still being in the changing room whilst others are in the race. And I do worry that in 10, 20 years' time, we're going to find we're importing cars because we didn't build a supply chain for electric vehicles here. We're going to be importing steel because we didn't get our steel to low carbon. And we're importing gas because we didn't invest in hydrogen. There's every reason to believe that Britain can be global leaders in some of these industries because of our industrial heritage, because of our geography, because of our great universities and innovators, but only if you've got a government that partners with business to exploit these massive opportunities in front of us.
Indeed, and also if you've got the money as a government, you've already had to scale back on your huge green promise. Is that the way the future lies, that all of these promises, these ideas, these, wonderful kind of blue sky thinking is just going to end up being as nothing in the face of the economic, future that we're facing at the moment?
Well, we've absolutely got to pursue the Green Prosperity Plan. It's the way to get growth and good jobs in Britain.
But you have had to pull back financially.
Well, since I first announced that 2 years ago, interest rates have gone up 12 times, inflation's gone to 8.7%, and growth has stalled. And look, I've always said that our fiscal rules are non-negotiable. I'm not going to play fast and loose with the public finances and put family security in jeopardy, which is what the Conservatives did last year.
That sounds a bit like austerity.
No, it's absolutely not austerity. What it's saying is I don't want further increases in the cost of living for families. I don't want their mortgage rates going up. I don't want their rents going up. I'm going to make sure that we have a grip of the public finances and we don't make unfunded spending commitments, which is what the Conservatives did last year with all of those tax cuts. I would never put family finances in jeopardy in the way the Conservatives have. But if we can do those things, then we will have the money for the Green Prosperity Plan. And if we don't do those things, then we're going to miss out on those opportunities. So yes, we've got to make sure that our public finances are in a stronger position than what the Conservatives have left them in. But we've also got to pursue those plans to grow the economy. And
but that said, I think what a lot of the entrepreneurs in this room will probably be interested in is how much you would require them to pay in order to ensure that families have secure household budgets. People talk about Rishi Sunak as not understanding the poor, but there's a lot of people who believe that Labour don't understand enterprise and how to get rich.
Well, before I became a politician, I worked in banking and financial services. I worked at the Bank of England for many years, and then I worked in the private sector. So I think I've got a pretty good understanding of how the economy works and the importance of wealth creation and business. And as I said right at the beginning, the Labour Party is a proudly pro-business party and always will be under Keir's leadership and with me in this role. So we've got to work with businesses. And actually, what businesses are saying is they don't want a government that's just going to get out of the way. They want a business to partner with them because the businesses here, they're on the cutting edge of new technologies. They work in universities, in science labs. They want to make sure that they've got access to people with those skills to make a success of their businesses. So they want a government that's going to have an industrial strategy working in partnership with them to make the most of these opportunities. And that's what a Labour government will be, whether it is in tech, in AI, in life sciences, or in some of the green industries that I've spoken about. All of these and realising our potential in them is going to require that partnership approach through the modern industrial strategy that we've already set out.
No clear water then, no clear blue water between you and the Conservative Party on that.
Well, look, if you want more chaos, then vote Conservative. If you want a change in direction, then vote Labour.
It's very hot here today. I'd just quite like a lie down. Rachel Reeves, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, thank you very much for joining me here live at the Founders Forum in Oxfordshire. This is Mariella Frostrup on Times Radio. I'll be back after the news. Thanks very much.